prices have been coming off from the peak, in part because we have good crops in other places, like especially on the wheat side. We have a record crop in Russia, which means many developing countries are more and more dependent on Russian wheat as opposed to getting the wheat supply from Ukraine. And even if this grain corridor is successful, we're talking about 4 months, potentially a little bit of an extension after that. But going forward, we are still seeing the destruction of Ukrainian agriculture for as long as the war continues. So it's very concerning. I think that 1.something billion people is because you will have that lack of calories coming from Ukraine spread out over many countries, and suddenly we're talking about the poorest countries on earth that are going to suffer the consequences the most.
What about the yield on the Russian side? Because my understanding is that the yield from Russia's perspective has actually increased, but of course with sanctions it's difficult for them to find markets to get those grains to. So what is your view on what's been happening on the Russia side of the equation?
Well, certainly there are many sanctions and many difficulties in terms of payments to Russian banks and so on. But I have to say, there are no direct sanctions on Russian agricultural exports or fertilizer exports. So those are legal to be exported, and they are being exported. It's anyone's guess whether Russia will manage to reach record exports that it should, given the size of its crop. But we'll have to wait and see. Normally, the peak of exports is in the next 3-4 months.
I guess if we turn this back to markets, we've been looking a lot at these inflation indices, and energy is one driver. The other driver is food inflation. What is the house view on whether or not we've reached peak food inflation in these indices?
Very difficult to say. I mean, certainly when we look at the commodities, prices have been coming off, and that's because of the recession fears around the world. Now the corridors will continue to keep pressure on prices, will prevent further price spikes, especially on wheat for the time being. But as I said, we're going to see plantings in Ukraine that will be very much subdued. We're going to see an even lower crop next year if the war continues. So potentially we're going to see prices coming back up once this corridor is over. And we might see even more price increases going forward. I have to say, normally there's a big delay between the price rise of a commodity and the price rise at the supermarket shelves. It's sometimes 3 months to 6 or 9 months. So at the supermarket shelves, I wouldn't be surprised to see further price increases, because the price increase that we've seen in commodities after the war has not been fully passed on to consumers.